He was the first Republican to get in the race for governor. He promises to empower parents and revive the manufacturing industry. He's Eric Nesbit, the Republican state Senate leader, and he's here in Studio A to talk about how he plans to do that. Michigan's more immediate problems may be higher prices from everything from avocados to automobiles. We're talking about President Trump's tariffs with our roundtable of experts, as well as what it means that Michigan's senator was chosen to deliver the Democratic response. And we're diving into the old mailbag this morning. It's Sunday, March 9th, 2025, and this is Flashpoint. Happy Sunday, everybody. I'm Jason Colthorpe. President Donald Trump delivered the longest address to a joint session of Congress in modern history this week. However, not once in that almost 100-minute-long speech did he say anything that prompted both sides of the chamber to stand and applaud together. That's also an anomaly. It seems the aisle has never been wider for lawmakers to reach across. We'll chat with our roundtable about the president's speech, specifically tariffs and how the stop-and-start effect is hitting Michigan right now. But first, we have a candidate for governor in the House. Senate Leader Eric Nesbit is one of two Republicans in the race and is trying to make a name statewide before the race gets even more muddled. We have a lot to discuss with him, so let's do it right now on Flashpoint. And here he is, Senate Leader Nesbit. Good morning. Thanks for being with us here. Let me start with roads. We've got a couple of plans out there now. The governor's plan, around $3 billion. The Speaker of the House has put out a $3 billion plan. Where do you fall with the ones we've seen? And if you become governor, how would you fix the roads?
Yeah, Jason, thanks for having me on. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to your listeners around the state and here in Southeast Michigan. Governor Whitmer ran on fixing roads. And unfortunately, after 6 years in office, her State of the State the other week, she says our roads continue to be in disrepair. And the $3.5 billion of bonding that she did in 2019, she said was a temporary fix, wasn't a permanent fix. Yeah. And 6 years into her term, the failures continue to mount. And I think your viewers, folks around Michigan, deserve so much better than what they're getting out of Lansing. And this is the point of what the House Republicans put forward and what you see Senate Republicans supporting, is saying that the first and foremost thing is that 100% of the taxes that you pay at the pump should go to roads and bridges, to fix our roads and bridges. That's $950 million to $1 billion every year. The $600 billion that the governor keeps putting into corporate welfare programs, 100% of that should be going to roads. That's another $600+ million a year. Over the last 6 years, this governor's put $4.5 billion into corporate welfare instead of fixing our roads. And so the money's there. It's prioritizing the budget. It's making sure that we're funding those areas of government that most affect people's lives. And as we get into these spring months, I mean, you just look at the jarring that's going on to your cars and people driving around.
Snyder and Whitmer both wanted to fix the roads, wanted all this money for it. And is it almost, if you become governor, how do you get through that to make it happen on your timeline?
Well, we're going to work hard to get it done this year. And I think you see with House Republicans, with the initiative that's there, winning back the House last year, the House Republican House, and then President Trump winning back the presidency last year. As I say, Republicans look to fund roads, law enforcement, education first. Democrats continue to fund all their social welfare programs first, and then ask for a tax increase to fund roads. Yeah. Michiganders cannot afford a tax increase as we go into with them being hit by inflation the way they are.
I'm glad you brought up education. Michigan students with the nation's report card coming through still clearly struggling, yet the per pupil funding is going up. I don't know if that's just what you would say, probably throwing money at a problem and it's not working, but if you become governor, how do you turn the tide of education and learning in our state?
This is why I'm running for governor, is that Michiganders drivers, Michigan families, Michigan students deserve so much better out of Lansing than what they're getting today. And this is part of our Michigan Students First agenda, Michigan Families First agenda, to saying that when 3 out of 4 fourth graders cannot read at grade level, 3 out of 4 eighth graders cannot read at grade level. Mississippi has better reading scores than Michigan does, and we continue to fall further and further behind because this governor's COVID lockdowns and then the repeal of accountability measures. This comes down to accountability in our schools, and it comes down
teachers,
administrators, superintendents, that leadership that's there, and empowering families and students to say, you guys have a choice. We shouldn't have zip code discrimination when it comes to the quality of schools. The families should have a say in it on where they send their students to school. We were close to getting school choice here in Michigan. And unfortunately, a few years ago, the Democrats won back the legislature.
Some of those zip codes deal with chronic absenteeism, and that's a huge problem, obviously, in some districts rather than others. In Detroit right now, they're having some success with gift cards being given to kids to be able to show up to school. Do you agree with that? And if not, how do you fix chronic absenteeism?
When I was touring a Detroit school a few years ago, and I got off from the regular path of what they wanted to show me around the school and started talking to some of the parents, their number one concern at the time was the safety of their kids coming home alive. That's how troubling some of our schools are and continue to be. And so until you are able to have a governor that's able to step up, do the systematic changes that are necessary here in the state that puts the students first instead of the adults first, you're not going to have the changes or the results that people in Michigan, families in Michigan, and hardworking taxpayers deserve.
You helped pass legislation to help lower auto insurance rates, yet Michigan still has some of the highest in the nation. If you are elected governor, how do you continue to make inroads for drivers?
Yeah, what we got to was a bipartisan deal with Governor Whitmer, and unfortunately she didn't want any changes made in auto insurance in 19. You see Detroit rates go down. You do see some the challenge that you have right now around the state. I'm working on a legislation right now to copy Ohio's laws because they have some of the lowest auto insurance rates in the nation. And if we're serious about being a low auto insurance rate state, we got to look at states that actually are the lowest in the nation. And so that's something where, whether it's Ohio or Wisconsin, something where going to a full tort system instead of one that continues to have what we have in terms of this no-fault system that has drove up costs and have priced people out of the market.
There's a bill that introduced that would ban transgender girls from playing girls' sports, and we saw a group of Republicans stand up asking the MHSAA to enforce the president's ban on this. Where does that fall in your priorities if you were governor?
Let's call it what it is. It's common sense. Don't let boys play against girls in women's sports. It's easy as that. I have a 5.5-year-old daughter. I have a younger son. I have a third kid on the way coming in April.
Congratulations.
God bless my wife. But as a father of a young family, if my daughter plays sports sometime in the future, whether it's middle school or in high school, I don't think, if you're serious about fair competition and protecting women's sports, why are you going to let biological men play in women's sports? Let kids be kids.
Yeah.
There's boys, there's girls. Let boys be boys, let girls be girls. And as they grow up, let's not go ahead and put our, this left-wing indoctrination into our schools. Let's get back to basics in our schools.
If everyone agrees on that, still, what about the argument that last year there were only 2 waivers in the state? Is there something to the argument we're making a huge deal out of something that's really not affecting anyone?
So if somebody's, this goes back. If you're mean to somebody one time, that's okay. I mean, if you're racist one time, that's okay. No, that is not okay. Let's go back and let's have equal protection. Let's protect our children. Let's get back to common sense in our schools, and let's not put this woke ideology into our schools. This is the thing. When I'm governor on day one, we need to root out DEI that's throughout pervasive in state government, that's pervasive in our school system. President Trump's working on that now. I'm going to join with President Trump to make sure that gets done here in Michigan.
Speaking of the president, he won Michigan during the presidential election. At the same time, Alyssa Slotkin won the Senate race. What does that say about the gubernatorial race coming up? Does some might look and see an independent like former Mayor Mike Duggan and think that's an advantage for him?
Well, this is why I put forward my Michigan First agenda, is saying that I'm going to have a positive agenda in Michigan where we can either keep the status quo continue doing what we're doing over the next 30 years and become a poorer, less populous state with less opportunities for our young people. Or we can shake the bureaucracy up in Lansing and say, we're here for growth, we're here to improve education, we're here to make sure that this is the best state to raise a family, start a career, and retire and actually grow as a state. If we do nothing over the next 30 years, we're going to shrink by about 700,000 people here in Michigan. That's not acceptable. On my watch, we're going to shake up the system in Lansing, and Michigan families will expect more with their hardworking tax dollars.
And I got 30 seconds, but you recently said bipartisanship's got to be more than a buzzword. It was clearly on display in Washington during the president's speech. How do you break through that and be able to reach across the aisle, which feels as wide as the Nile right now?
Yeah, I mean, this is about getting things done, making sure that common sense views that we fix our infrastructure, we compete for manufacturing jobs. We go ahead and put education first by empowering parents and making sure that students come first instead of adults. And that means having better accountability and having more choice in education in our schools.
All right. Senate Leader Eric Nesbit, thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. The Roundtable's next. All right, let's say good morning to our roundtablers. Politics editor and columnist at the Detroit News Channel Live and Good. Michael Griffey is the Detroit market leader at AECom, and Nancy Kaffer is the editorial page editor at the Detroit Free Press, and Jason Rowe, a political and communications strategist at Rose Strategic. Everybody, good morning. Thanks for being here. Let's talk about the president's speech from this week, and specifically tariffs. Let's just lead off on this. I thought it was, as we tape this on Friday morning, I should point out that they've been delayed against Canada and Mexico for a month, although Justin Trudeau, I liked his quote saying, "What's your reaction? It's Thursday." So, Michael, let me start with you. What was your reaction to the speech? And as tariffs play into this, where do we go from here?
Well, the speech was long. Yeah. Let's start there. And, you know, in a lot of ways it built, there was kind of two sides to it. On one side, there were things that you could really smile to. We were talking about the 13-year-old cancer survivor. Yeah. But in real life, we're taking away cancer funding, cancer research funding. So, you know, it's hard to kind of see both sides of that. I think it was not a speech that I think carried a lot of weight.
Well, no moments where both sides rose to clap at the same time, which does actually happen from time to time. Jace, let me ask you about when we talk tariffs. We saw this week some aluminum and steel producers said, hey, our business is up since the threat of tariffs went into effect. Is that evidence that they are working, or at least the threat of them are working in some capacity?
Well, I think in spite of how Trump does things, I think you have to look at a range of things where he's gotten some results. It's ugly how he gets to that point, but I think whether it is, you know, looking at, you know, President Sheinbaum of Mexico dealing with narco bosses and turning over people.
Cartels.
You look at, you know, a lot of the things that are happening. I mean, go to the Middle East. I mean, the Arab countries have done very little to try to solve the problem. Trump says he's going to develop Gaza, turn it into a resort, and all of a sudden Egypt comes forward with a plan to rebuild Gaza. So he doesn't get there in a way that I think any of us are particularly comfortable, but sometimes he has been prompting things. As it relates to tariffs, I don't think we're at a point yet where tariffs are the policy. I still think they are a tactic. But down the road, this could become American policy. But I think that will be interesting to see how Republicans do respond, because our DNA for decades has been free trade, and to all of a sudden become the party of tariffs would be quite a departure from who we've been.
Nancy, you look like you want to jump in here.
You know, obviously Jason is correct in that we haven't had a consistency on tariffs enough for us to understand what the effect might be. But before I came to the Free Press, I worked at Crane's Detroit Business for 5 years. And the mantra when it comes to business and policy making is that business likes consistency. Business needs consistency. They need to plan, be able to plan, you know, 2, 5, 10 years out. And so I don't, this is sort of the opposite of that. So it's going to be really fascinating to examine results, to see how this does affect business, how businesses are reacting, because businesses, again, who with the Democratic leader would say that they need consistency, they need fewer regulations, who may be liking the Trump thing. There's a lot to examine here and to place into context.
Chad, you wrote this week that it affects Michigan more than most states.
It does. I mean, and it's been a roller coaster, to say the least, this week. I mean, the justifications for the tariffs. I mean, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, was all over television saying this is a drug war. Well, then you go look at what the drug is, and they say, well, it's fentanyl from Canada, and it's literally, I mean, not to discount fentanyl is a horrible drug. It's literally the equivalent of a suitcase of fentanyl has come across the border on an annual basis. One year it was 2 pounds, and whereas it's 21,000 pounds coming from Mexico. So their rationale for why they're going to basically upend the entire economy has just got kind of like flattened. And then the other thing that the president had to face this week, during his speech, he said he talked to the big 3 automakers and they're all happy about it. And that was not true. I mean, they were not happy about it. They were lobbying like hell to get this to change, because the reality is, if a piston is forged in Canada and it comes across the Ambassador Bridge, you'd have to tax it 25%. Then you put it into an actual engine in an assembly plant here in Southeast Michigan, say the Stellantis plant in Trenton, and then in a V6. And then it goes back over the bridge to be then installed in a Chrysler Pacifica at the Windsor assembly plant. Our economies are so intertwined. You're going to tax this thing 3 times. Then when the Pacifica comes back across the bridge, I mean, it would add $10,000 to the cost of a Chrysler Pacifica overnight. So the president had to be talked into, hey, you can't do this, or you will literally send Ohio and Michigan and upper Midwest states into recession.
Not to mention, we've seen the Premier of Ontario now talking about, hey, we'll shut your electricity off. We thought, well, we were talking about autos for a minute, and now all of a sudden electricity's out there. Does anybody think that could happen, Jason? Or if it does, how effective would it be?
I think they'll wait till it's a little warmer, maybe, because if there's some deaths resulting in people not having heat in the winter. Listen, I do think there's going to be probably a tit-for-tat escalation between the 2 countries, depending on how this plays out. And I think Nancy's right in terms of consistency. I mean, you look at when Trump threatened tariffs, a month ago, and then pulled back, the markets responded.
Yeah.
When he did it this week, the markets did not respond. There's a yo-yo going on with the tariff fight, and I think right now business and the markets don't like what they're seeing, and I think if this continues, where markets aren't responding to whatever his tit is in that given day, that he is going to maybe pull back on some of the tariff rhetoric.
Michael, what did you make of Alyssa Slotkin being chosen to deliver the response, by the way?
Well, I mean, Senator Slotkin won Michigan in a state that the president won Michigan. I think and I've written extensively about Alyssa Slotkin. I think she did a really good job of articulating kind of, a core set. I would have liked to have seen her speak on the DEI attack.
It was pretty centrist.
Yeah, it was very centrist, and there's a real big block of black voters that helped propel her through a Democratic primary, and that speech, it seemed like they were invisible.
Yeah.
So there's been a big, sort of, this is no surprise to anyone here, but sort of a debate for the heart and soul of the Democratic Party for at least 8-9 years now about, after 2016, to win, should it be more centrist? Should it be way more liberal to activate the base, the most left part of the party? And there's not been a lot of consensus about how to do that. So you've had some truly mixed messages kind of coming out of Democratic politics and campaigning. And then, predictably after Senator Slotkin's response, you had a lot of people who were really impressed. They thought she was level-headed and mature. And then you had a lot of people who said, why isn't she denouncing the president? Why isn't she angry and outraged? So this sort of war about try to be more middle or try to be way more left is nowhere near a resolution.
Well, I think we're also talking about a realignment in political ideology. We were talking about tariffs. We talk about this being the free trade. you know, there's a lot of folks in Pontiac, folks all over the state of Michigan that free trade crippled those communities.
Yeah.
And then we're talking about what being centrist really means. So I think that we're looking at a political realignment, and to Nancy's point, the soul of the Democratic Party needs to be outlined pretty quickly.
I kept hearing Howard Lutnick today this week, why are we building cars in Canada? Why are we building cars in Mexico? Well, a dirty little secret in this town is that General Motors line workers got $13,800 bonus checks in their bank account last month. And they got that in part because they build Buick Enclaves in South Korea. The president didn't put a tax on South Korea for some reason this week. They build Chevy Equinoxes in Mexico. That makes General Motors profitable enough to be able to still build trucks in Flint and new electric vehicles here in Detroit. But then they got to build some of those cheaper models overseas in order to have those kind of profits, in order to have those kind of big fat checks.
Yeah, I got to let that be the last word. Gang, thanks again for being here. Appreciate it. We could talk all day about a few other things too. I wish we could. Well, one more break and we're right back on Flashpoint. Let's dive into the mailbag before we finish up this edition. Over the last few weeks, I've gotten emails, feedback on social media, even got some old-fashioned mail. Here's a little taste of that. On the topic of roads, Douglas House writes, being a neighbor from the south, Windsor, your roads used to be disgusting. Look at I-75 now. 8 Mile to Auburn Hills. This stretch of roads is probably one of the best in the state of Michigan. It took forever, but the best I've ever seen. From Martin C., Ohio, Illinois, Indiana all have toll roads to help keep roads funded. When I travel to other states, I pay with no problem. Good feedback on our education discussion a few weeks ago. From this viewer, suggestion regarding phone use for students in class. A certain percentage is parents telling their children to do chores when they get home. Ask the parents. I believe some honestly don't realize how distracting that is for their child. That's from Red Robin 867. Susan Gibson wrote in, the state cannot survive less education. The general public might do better with incentives to education, a means to an end. Last week, we paid tribute to Gene Hackman on his passing. Sonia from Plymouth writes, you're right on the money with your picks for Hackman's best characters. His Lex Luthor was the first time I ever liked the villain better than the hero. To this day, whenever I hear someone say, everyone's got their faults, I immediately think, mine's in California. I think about it when I hear Mr. Smucker. Finally, I got this from Hank after my first Flashpoint. Jason, your dress on Sunday morning was terrible. Gray suit jacket, blue pants, and brown shoes. Terrible look. Sloppy. Better dress would be gray suit jacket, white shirt, and a color contrasting tie. The tie you wore was somebody else's. Bad. If you want to be taken seriously, dress the part. Okay, Hank. But I got another email from Haberdasher Hank after last week's show regarding my outfit. Very good. Cuffs too. Shoes are polished. Well, Hank, if I'm anything, I'm coachable. Folks, you can always hit me up at Flashpoint at clickondetroit.com about anything. Meet the Press is coming up next. I'm Jason Colthorpe. We'll see you later.